to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, a few things first. We've been doing a little bit of work, on our technology, our sound, our audio and visual system, and I've been asked by our IT specialist to encourage everyone to speak directly into the microphones this evening so we can gauge the effectiveness of whatever it is we did to improve our system. So if you'd please take note of that, that would be greatly appreciated. You do have a revised agenda in front of you this evening. And tonight present are myself, Mayor Morrow, Council Members Burgoyne, Gearbaugh, Peters, Rhodes, Roth, Tahar, and from City staff we have City Manager Campbell, Clerk Royal, Treasurer Bennett, Business Ambassador Korfman, and Deputy Treasurer McDonough. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as amended? I believe, Mr. Burgoyne, you have a few items you would like to add under the discussion portion of our agenda this evening.
Yeah, I did email some questions. One of them had to do with Digipod, which is on the agenda.
Right.
I also wanted to follow up on the TIFA budget item.
Okay.
Whether it's concluded tonight or it moves again to the next meeting doesn't really matter, but I just want it to keep moving.
Okay.
And also, I did not get a clear answer on our request for low-cost state fund for a sewer construction. So I wanted to talk about that or get some feedback.
Okay. All right, so the two items that Mr. Burgoyne is adding under discussion items would be TIFA budget item would be the first, and then low-cost funds for sewer construction would be the second. And both of those would follow reports and other announcements and an update on the Leather Bucket Alley. Okay. Are there any other additions to the agenda this evening? Mr. Roth?
I'm not exactly sure where it should fit, but as far as okaying the flying of the German flags during the visit from the delegation from Germany, which would be next weekend.
We're going to put that on the consent agenda. Yeah.
It's all right. I'd say I've seen a letter, but I haven't seen it as part of our agenda. I don't know whether it's necessary or not.
That was supposed to be on the consent agenda. Okay. Yeah, we'll add that as a part of the consent agenda, Mr. Roth.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I apologize it's not printed on there. We'll make it the last item on consent agenda. Approval of the approving the flying of German flags during the visit of our friends from Lindenburg, Germany.
Right, which would be, let's say, the 10th to the 15th or 16th.
Okay, let's say 16th just to be safe. Everyone clear on that? Mr. Oh, the 11th, excuse me. So 11th to 16th, Mr. Roth.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you for reminding us of that. Apologize for its omission this evening. Are there any other amendments to the agenda this evening? No, then I would seek a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
So moved.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Tahar, seconded by Councilmember Rhodes. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries unanimously. There are no absences this evening, so we'll dispense with that motion. Up first, we have a presentation from our colleagues at Plant Moran to present the annual audit. We have both Martin and Nick here this evening. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having us. We are not going to go through every single page in the report, so don't worry. Good evening. My name is Martin Olenek. I'm the partner on the audit, and with me is Nick Garika, who is the audit manager. We are going to go over three documents essentially today. One is the audit report, which there's actually one or two pages I wanted to go over in there, and then also the graphs, which Nick's going to present, and I'm going to go over the management letter at the end. Feel free during the presentation to stop us at any time if you have any questions or anything like that, or we can answer all the questions at the end, whatever the preference is. For the audit report, which is the thickest of the documents, the item that I wanted to present to you is on pages 1 and 2, which is the audit opinion. Basically, the rest of the document is your document, and this shows that we've audited the financial statements and that you can rely on the numbers that are in here. It is called an unqualified opinion, which a lot of times I always thought that it sounded like there's something not right when it's unqualified, but technically it says there's no qualification, so you can rely on the numbers. That's exactly what you should expect every single year. Nick's going to go over the graphs, and as I said, I'll go over the management letter right after.
Thank you, Martin.
Press control. Here. Function, and then there you go. There you go. There you go. That's right. That should work. There we go. I was thinking about it again.
I'll wait till that comes up. Well, so first I'll just start by saying thank you for the opportunity to present in front of you. Another successful year. So I'll begin once this image comes up. There we go. Okay. So again, I'm presenting the graphs, which is just the financial highlights of the city. I've been going through and touching on a few points, but again, feel free to stop me if you have any questions. We're going to start on page 1, which is the general fund revenues. So for financial statement purposes, the fire department special assessment fund is included in the general fund. So when we talked about the general fund for these graphs, we're really talking about the combined general fund, which includes the fire department special assessment fund as well as the general fund itself. So as we can see from the graph, property taxes is the significant source of the funds. It makes up about 65% of the revenue in the general fund. That's the two blue pieces of that pie. And again, about 65%. State sources is primarily made up of the state revenue sharing for the sales taxes collected in the state. The major pieces of the charges for services are the administrative fees that the general fund charges back to the funds. So as the general fund is the operating account, it covers a lot of the expenses and then charges those other funds for reimbursement. So some of that revenue you see back is the administrative cost from the other funds. And then other income includes local grant money, cable fees, and some other miscellaneous items. But taking a look at the next slide on page 2, we stay with the general fund revenues, but it takes a look in comparison to the past couple years. As we can see, property taxes have continued to decrease since 2009. We are starting to see a bottoming out of that as the decrease was not as much as it's been in the years past, and hopefully we're going to be seeing that starting to rise going forward. State sources and charges for service remain pretty similar. The one decent change was in the other sources, which relates to a couple different factors. The first is the Sauk Trail repayment. So in years past, or in a few years back, the general fund paid for some construction costs for Sauk Trail, the component unit. This year, Sauk Trail began reimbursing the general fund back for that cost. So that's the additional revenue pickup is the payment from Sauk Trail. And then the other reason for the increase is the monies from the library and the county for the non-motorized cart path at the library. So moving on to the next slide, slide 3, we stay in the general fund, but we're moving over to the expenditure side. Again, this includes the fire department special assessment fund. The general government piece represents the largest chunk. It's made up of a lot of the general expenses, like the majority of the salaries, wages, professional fees, office expenses, insurance costs, etc. Public safety relates to costs associated with the police and fire. Public works, sanitation, street lighting, and other costs. Other expenses include community development, parks and rec costs, etc. And then the debt service relates to principals and interest paid for your debt obligations. But moving on to the next slide is, again, the breakout of expenditures and comparing them to the past couple years. So we can see a total decrease in the expenses of almost $400,000. So what this slide really does is the city is doing a very good job at keeping its costs contained. Again, the total decrease is about $400,000. The other expenses did have an increase during the year. This was really due to the capital projects that were in the fund this year. So the city paid the expenses, but it got reimbursed, as we can see when we saw it on the revenue side. There was the offsetting revenue, but then to gross it up, we show the expenses on this side, and that really was the main factor driving the increase in the other costs. On to slide 5, we see the general fund balance. So a couple years back, accounting rules changed, but we kept the format similar to years prior. So if you look at 2011, 2012, and 2013, there was a GASB change that changed the buckets of the fund balance. But for the purposes of this graph, we kept those as the same buckets as years past, just to show for comparability and consistency's sake. The general fund's fund balance did increase during the year. That can really be attributed more to cost cutting than kind of an increase in revenue. And why I say that is because the increase in revenues in the general fund is mostly due to reimbursements of capital projects cost. So again, they're bringing in extra costs, but it's not technically more funds to be used for operations. It's more that the general fund paid out these costs for capital projects, and then it is in turn getting reimbursed, and again, we have to show the gross up. So that's what the majority of the general fund increase in revenues was. But even with those capital projects, we still saw that general fund expenditures were still down about $400,000. So again, I think it's good to point out that the city is doing a great job at keeping its costs down, and that's really driving the increase in fund balance for the general fund. The percentage of fund balance to the expenditures is about 20%. That does include the fire department special assessment, but the general fund standing by itself is around that same level as well. So that's right in line with your newly developed fund balance that you implemented during the year to keep it at about 15 to 20%. There's not really any specific percentage that you can look at and say, yep, that's the correct percentage, that's the exact percentage that we should have. It's always good to keep some form of fund balance because as we saw in 2009, things can happen. The market can go south and you might need a rainy day fund to kind of dip into. So the fact that you have a fund balance and it's beginning to increase is a good thing. Moving on to the next slide, we have the capital expenditures. And let me just back up by saying the past couple slides, I mentioned that there was an increase in revenue due to capital projects, but then we look at this slide and we see that the capital expenditures went down actually. And what I meant by that in the last slides was the amount of capital projects that the general fund was in fact reimbursed for and showing revenue is what increased, not necessarily the total capital expenditures. So looking at this slide, we can see that the total capital expenditures decreased to about $1.4 million. The largest piece of that is the highway and street construction, and that related mostly to the Woodland Drive. The general fixed assets included multiple items, but the significant portion of that was, again, the non-motorized cart path that we saw in the revenue and expense section. Okay. So moving on to slide 7, this kind of moves away from the general fund and looks at the city as a whole. So instead of looking at just the general fund in specific, we're now looking at the general fund as well as all the other governmental funds, plus the GASB adjustments to get us from modified accrual to the full accrual, which is your government-wide activity. So property taxes shows not only the general fund, but it also shows the solid waste and it shows the municipal streets, and then the charges for services. Now instead of showing just general fund, it also shows a lot of the revenues from the Saline Rec Fund. But again, as we can see with this, this still just goes to demonstrate that property taxes still is the significant portion of your city's revenue source. And then slide 8 again shows the full accrual city-wide statements, and this is the expenditures for that. So the general government piece of this is where a lot of those general fund expenditures are recorded. But then also now the rec and culture piece shows the expenses for the Saline Rec Fund, and then the highways and streets expenses shows a lot of the major and local roads expenses. So again, not just the general fund, the city as a whole. So on to slide 9. We see the composition of the property taxes by the millage, and I think the one thing to take away here is although there's a large millage that's being charged to the residents, only a very small piece of this pie is actually kept by the city as revenue to the city. So out of the 61.9 mills to the far right, if we're looking at the far right pie, the 1.6 of solid waste and the 13.9 of the operating, that's the city's portion of that. The rest, although it's being paid by the residents and collected by the city, is being remitted to other various agencies. And then the next slide shows the millage history. So as we were looking at the previous slide, we saw those city mills, which was the solid waste and the operating at 15.53 for the current year. This just shows the history of those mills. And as we can see, the city's mills were unchanged since 2006. For the next year, for 2014, the board did approve a millage increase of 0.75 mills. The city has tried to keep its costs down to its residents, and as we can see that through the history of keeping the mills consistent, but this 0.75 increase is necessary to keep costs, or keep revenues in line with costs. Yes, Mr. Burgoyne?
Yes, in looking at the millage rate and looking back at slide 5, which shows the general fund balance for 2013 at about 20%. That last item where the fund balance increased to 20%, that's as of the year ended June 30th. The June 30th just passed, right?
Correct.
And that is, if you flip back to slide 10, that would relate to the constant tax rate because that does not yet include the additional tax rate, right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Do you want us to
That's it.
go on? Okay. Okay. All right.
Very simple.
I was expecting a question.
No?
All right. But moving on to the next slide, slide 11 now we're on. Even with that increase, the comparability, slide 11 shows the comparability of the millages from Saline to the surrounding communities. And even with that increased millage of 0.75, the city's millages are still very comparable and within where the other surrounding communities are at. The other thing I want to point out with this one is the excess levy capacity. So what this represents is the additional mills that the city is allowed to assess, but again has chosen not to assess, and that's the purposeful act of trying to keep your costs low to your residents and you know, not charging as much as you could, but trying to just stick to what you need.
You know, one comment that I did want to add too is, if you look at the history, especially 2009 and 10, and you know the years that really the property tax values just dropped, and you know, just the economy just went through the floor. You did not increase your taxes, so which is again, commend the council for being able to control your costs, because many communities, if you had that excess capacity, many communities would have already increased the taxes way back when, and you've been able to keep things in check. But there's only so much you can do when the property taxes erode so fast. And it's gonna take many, many years to recover that property tax value. Even though, you know, some people may see their property tax values increase now 10%, 15% per year, your taxable value can only go up so much. It's, you know, locked in by inflation. So you're not gonna just rebound back to how it was in 2007 or 8. So I just wanna point that out.
Okay. Moving forward to slide 12, we see, sorry, let me skip over. We see the taxable value that's within the city. So again, the taxable value has been decreasing. It does look though in 2014, we're starting to see that finally increase versus decrease, which is always a good sign. And one other thing to point out here is just to point out the personal property taxes. So for 2014, 22% of the taxable value relates to personal property taxes. As Martin is going to get into when he goes over the management letter, the state did repeal legislation relating to personal property taxes. Nothing's set in stone yet, but there could be a potentially very large impact on the revenue that the city is able to collect because of the possible changes in the personal property tax. But again, Martin will be getting into a little more detail with that. And then the next slide, slide 13, this kind of speaks to what Martin was saying. So this shows the difference between the taxable value and the state equalized value. And we had seen the gap close here a little bit over the past couple years because there's been a decrease in taxable value. Because although the taxable value is at a certain level, that there's only a certain amount legally that taxable value, or sorry, state equalized value can increase. So even though taxable value goes up 5%, let's say, state equalized value is capped at the inflation. So it's been closing, but then we can see as the taxable value increased again, it actually increased larger than what the state equalized value was legally able to increase. So that's why we're starting to see that gap widen a little bit again. So even though taxable value is going, your revenue collected is not going to be fully affected because it can only go up a certain amount. Moving on to slide 14. So this shows the actual state shared revenue compared to what is projected or what would have been projected had there not been any cuts from the state. So in 2000, the state changed the calculation of the statutory piece, which it's now called the EVIT piece. What this graph does is it really just shows the effect of that change. And as we can see, it's a pretty significant change. So for the 2014 year, it's projected to be about a $570,000 difference between what will be collected and what would have been collected had this statute not gone into effect or had this change in calculation not gone into effect. So the next two slides, slides 15 and 16, these show the overall view of the operations of the water and sewer. As we'll see in both funds, there was an increase in the operating revenue and a relatively similar level of operating expenses. These operations were both based on rates that are going to expire at the end of 2014. Both funds are in pretty healthy shape right now, but there are significant expenses that are coming down the pike. And including pretty significant capital project in the sewer fund. And if we look at the sewer fund in particular, even though there was an increased revenue and even a bit of a decrease in operating expenses, your operating income was only at about $90,000. So as costs will rise and as those capital projects start to take place, there is a potential that you might start eating into that fund balance. And that's why, since the rates kind of expire at the end of this year, we do recommend that you do take a look at those rates and evaluate any potential rate adjustments so that you can ensure that operating revenues are covering operating expenses. So slide 17, this is the pension slide that just shows the actuarial assets and the actuarial liabilities that were done based on an actuarial valuation done as of December 31st, 2012. This pretty much just goes in to help the city determine how much it needs to put in each year to fund its pension. So if we look, the amounts on the far left, those are your actuarial accrued liabilities. So that's really that represents the total cost that it would cost to fund 100% your any current and future pension costs. And then the amount in the middle, the 15 million, is your assets that you have right now designated for your pension. And then the last slide, slide 18, this is really just some additional information showing the revenue for the city. These figures do match the financial statements and are meant just to show what revenues are in each buckets. So unless there are any specific questions with graphs, Mr. Burgoyne?
Not with the graphs, but I had questions in the audited numbers.
Okay.
We can go over the numbers right now or go over the management letter, whatever,
Oh,
whichever way you choose.
no, I'll do it later. That's
Okay.
fine.
Well, then I'll pass it off to Martin so we can cover the management letter. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Martin, are you going to use the PowerPoint?
I am not.
You are not? Okay. Chase, you can probably lift up the screen if you just want to give us 1 second, Martin.
Sure.
Please proceed.
Thank you. I'm going to cover the last of the 3 documents, the management letter that's addressed to the city council. There are 3 sections in the letter. The first section, which starts on page 3, basically is in response to the pre-audit letter that you would have received a couple of months back, and talks about the audit process, if there's any issues that were involved during the audit, any disagreements with management, et cetera. I do want to point out there is no disagreements or nothing unusual to report. So I just want to make sure that you're aware. On page 6, we start with general recommendations that we would have noted during the audit. I do want to point out that many communities receive actually 4 sections to this letter. The 4th section is often talked about as significant deficiencies or material weaknesses. You do not have a 4th section. We can't specifically say there are no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses, but we didn't find any. So we just want to say that's a good thing, that you're only getting general recommendations. I'm sure there's some. I'm just kidding. No, so I do want to commend the city on doing a great job on its books. I know that we're auditors, so we're supposed to be picky, so we do have some general recommendations, but they're general recommendations, nothing that we noted that was significant. First, we start with investment rate of return on the pension assets, and I know Nick talked about the assets a little bit. In the audit report, as well in the financial statements, we talk about a new pronouncement that's coming out, GASB number 68. That new pronouncement is going to basically force communities in utilizing certain parameters when talking about potential, when using evaluations from actuaries that you receive on how much you project from, for example, for investments. So right now you're showing an 8% rate of return, which is relatively aggressive. However, it's still somewhere in that window. However, with GASB 68, the parameters tighten, so most likely that percentage will have to decrease, which means that your projected funding may have to increase. So there's certain things that change in that. We'll discuss it with the city as the time comes in order to make sure that you're ready for the pronouncement, but I do want to point that out, that there's going to be a little tighter parameters, which is actually overall a good thing because all communities have to abide by it. So it's going to be more comparable for all communities. And by the way, 8% is not unusual for communities to use right now.
Doesn't that come from MERS, though? Isn't that the 8% that MERS holds? Because sometimes they only get 2%, and then sometimes they get 15 or 20% gain in a year, depending if the economy is coming back.
Correct.
And right now, pretty soon, the Fed will probably ease off, and the rates will start going up, and and if the government starts again, the federal government, will probably continue to grow, so MERS will probably be pretty well off, and they may get the 8% or more. So would MERS be taking the lead in that, or does the city of Saline have to take the lead?
MERS should be, but I would not just leave that up to the professional firm. I would say make sure you have the discussions with them. Make sure that they're aware. I'm sure they are, very reputable firm, but I just would want to make sure that you're taking the steps ahead of time so nothing's being missed. Bank reconciliation review, during our testing, we did note that the bank reconciliations were prepared timely. However, some of the reviews were lagging a little bit, sometimes 2, 3, or 4 months after month end. So I would recommend making sure that when you prepare the bank reconciliations, which usually should be done in the subsequent month, that the review takes place within a week or two after that. So that way it's a little bit closer. Receivables, we've had this note for the last few years. There's a receivable from the state, about $140,000 to $150,000. So we've been always encouraging the city to try and collect. I'm assuming that everyone's aware, but you've been successful after year end to finally get the check from the state. So we do point it out here just because as of June 30th, the receivable is still on the books, but subsequently the state did approve it and the city was able to collect it. Accounts payable, when we were testing the accounts payable, there are a few circumstances where, especially where some invoices that you receive, there are recurring month-to-month invoices. Sometimes they overlap a period each month. So instead of accruing in a certain, as of June 30th, sometimes you don't accrue or don't record it until the following year. So you still have 12 months worth of activity because from year to year it's the same treatment. But technically we should make sure that there's a clean cutoff as of June 30th. So what we would encourage the city to do, not necessarily you have to record all those dollar amounts, but make sure you keep track of it to make sure that if they did become significant, that you make sure that you would have to accrue for those. Similar on unbilled water and sewer revenue, this would be a similar comment in the past. For the unbilled water and sewer, since we don't bill as of June 30th exactly, there's a portion that should be accrued. And again, you have 12 months worth of activity, but what we would encourage the city to do is review those, the unbilled portion, and record that as of the year end. Again, nothing of significance. And then Nick mentioned earlier about the water and sewer funds. We would encourage the city to look over the water and sewer funds from the perspective of not that they're in dire straits or anything like that right now, but what I would always encourage the city to take a look for the next 5 years or so that way there's no surprises down the line. I have seen some communities actually implement a 20 or 25% water and sewer rate increases to the residents because they weren't looking for the following 5 years. This would smooth the increases out if there was such an increase that's necessary. Yes.
I note here that you say they're set through 2014. And I think that in the last rate adjustment, we had an increase on the sewer side. And if you look at the financial statements, page 19, the enterprise funds statement of revenues and expenses, you have approximately $4 million in operating revenue and almost $1 million in change in net position. In other words, a plus, a gain. So where you have a gain of more than 20%, and where if you look at individually, water and sewer only had 79,000 income, had only a small income, but the sewer rates are increasing this year. Wouldn't it make more sense to let that rate increase play out and then look at the audit next year and then make your basis forward? Because right now what we have is we have a net gain.
Yeah, so currently there is a net gain. The only thing is for me, it's hard to answer without seeing a 5-year projection. It's easier to see just 1 year out. The only thing is that I'd hate to have surprises down the line, especially if you're thinking about the cash use and if there's any significant projects, which I believe there are some significant projects.
We do.
So from that perspective, I always say, 5 years out to me would be a minimum. If you can look out even further, that'd be great. And I'm not saying that you have to do this full-blown huge study and incur all this money to do a projection. You can do something from the perspective as you do a budget for the next year. You can do something similar to a budget for the following 4 years after that. And it doesn't have to be as detailed as a budget plan, but something to point out, okay, where are we headed? What are the expenses that we're looking at? What's the cash flow looking like. And I would focus on the cash flow probably even more so because of the expenditures you're going to be incurring on the capital assets. Capital assets do not show on your P&L here on the income statement, but it's true cash going out the door.
So, something similar to the 5-year projection for the general fund, but just in terms of cash flow.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Sure.
The SAW legislations, SAW grant and that type of stuff, projecting the rates that we should be charging, how our facility is, the repair of it and that type of stuff. What effect does that have with your audit?
So
Or in the future, how might it affect it?
So honestly, I don't believe the audit will change significantly or anything like that. I would say just from the rate structure itself, I would make sure that you're focusing on the right things when you're budgeting and projecting out for the next 5 years from your income and expenses.
I thought
But
that
from
was
the-
part of the requirement with the
Correct.
SAW grant.
But from the, oh, go ahead. Yeah, but from the audit itself will not change. The last section in the letter that I want to point out, and these are legislative items, so basically items that are happening around the state and things that can influence the city that may have an impact. So first item is budgetary stress. So I know we've talked about it over the last few years, and I know Nick mentioned during the graph presentation about the effects of property taxes, state share revenues, et cetera. So do want to point out that, as we discussed earlier, the city's done a great job of making sure that your expenses are in check. I would encourage the city to keep your efforts going, because that recovery is a very slow process. Just to recover the property taxes to what you were at 3 or 4 years back may take another 8 to 10 years. It's not going to be an overnight process. Revenue sharing, this just talks about the EVIP, the calculations, and what needs to be presented, so that way it's available to the public. So we do point out items that are the category 1, 2, and 3 in the due dates and what needs to be presented. And the city has been submitting all the due dates last year as well as so far in order to receive the EVIP money appropriately. On page 10, personal property tax legislation. Again, Nick mentioned that briefly, about 22% of your taxable value consists of personal property taxes, clearly a significant portion. There is legislation that's supposed to be voted upon next year, August of 2014. However, the first collection or the first assessment is in July. And if the vote doesn't pass, and technically if personal property taxes come back, you already miss out on the July collection. So it's not something you can go back in time. And then also, I know that state has different mechanisms to try and provide funding for communities that miss out on personal property taxes. The problem is that nothing's guaranteed. So I always encourage communities to make sure you keep an eye on your personal property taxes, and even more so why it's important to budget out for the next 5 years where your fund balance is at. Deficit elimination plans on page 11. So you do not have a deficit in any of your funds, but we do point out the definition because it has changed over the last year and what the city or what the state looks at as a deficit. In your governmental funds, if you have a negative fund balance, it's a deficit. However, if it's in the, let's say, enterprise fund, water or sewer funds, even if you have a negative fund balance, you have to look at your working capital. So if your current assets minus your current liabilities are positive, you technically don't have a deficit. So it's just definitions and that show what you have to provide if you have to do a deficit elimination plan. There are opportunities to bond for pension obligations and post-employment benefits. We just want to point that out to the city that there is an opportunity. However, I do have to say that most communities are not taking advantage of that. There's also on page 12, Michigan's public pension systems, Public Act 347 of 2012, and just talks about how funds can be invested in different requirements necessary. And this just kind of spells all the requirements out for you. And then finally, the last item that we have in the letter talks about Michigan qualifying statements and how it needs to be submitted. In the past, you could do a paper form. Now it's actually done electronically, so we do want to point that out. All the instructions are provided to you here. That is all the information we were going to go over. I know Mr. Burgoyne had some questions.
Mr. Burgoyne, do you have some additional questions, sir?
Yes, I do. I have basically three.
Please.
I'm looking in the financial report, the paper copy, and in the first part of the required supplemental information, it shows the general fund original budget and actual. That does include fire, doesn't it? You don't anywhere in here have the general fund by itself, do you?
We
in
do
our
not.
documents?
We do not.
Okay. Okay, that was just a quick
Let me just-
question. Under water and sewer, you're recommending that we basically do 5 years of spreadsheet and see if we are going to get ourselves into trouble by using up cash for capital items, for example. And you said that those items are not shown in here, but what you do show in here on a $4 million budget is you show $1 million of depreciation.
Correct.
And to me, that's kind of the same thing. That means that we have $1 million to use, and it'll still balance here on the page.
Correct. Yeah, the only
Each
thing
year.
is, if you, so it's $1 million a year, but if you have a $5 million expenditure in 1 year, that's where the issues come in.
Right, right. I get it. Okay, and then I have one more question, which is, we adopted a fund balance policy, and our fund balance policy is we have a goal of the city of Saline to achieve and maintain an unreserved fund balance in the general fund equal to 15 to 20% of the actual prior year, fiscal year audited expenditure. Now, if we wanted to take some funds, and I'll say $90,000 worth of funds, or $100,000 worth of funds, and say, we want to say that we want to have funds in contingency for major equipment breakdown or something of that fashion, and the city council would vote to set those aside. How would you do that in the budget?
You can assign, so for the financial statements, you can assign a certain dollar amount,
We, in our budgeting
and in the budget,
process,
you can have a
we would vote
contingency.
to set aside a certain amount in case trucks or tractors or snow plows or something
Correct.
broke down. We don't really know what it's going to be to break down, but we could just call it major equipment, line for major equipment. So how would you do that in your budgeting?
So most communities would show an expenditure line item for that.
And they would call it,
That you could call contingency, you can call it capital outlay,
would you,
contingency for future
Designate
capital
that?
outlay. What I would recommend doing is doing assigning your fund balance for that dollar amount
or
at the end of the year. So that way,
if the council votes it, wouldn't it be designated?
so there, let me see. There's different classifications that occurred over the last few years, and I believe that one was actually assigned. It's not committed or restricted. I believe it's assigned, but let me double check real quick here.
In our definitions of our fund balance policy, we use the word designated where the legislative authority votes it.
Yep, so with GASB 54, when it came out, you have different classifications on page 32. So you'll have non-spendable, restricted, committed, assigned, or unassigned. And yours would be committed. It would be formally set aside by the city council.
Right, and when we put in the fund balance policy into the financial statements to match it up with the actual classifications based on GASB, we did change it from designated or undesignated to unassigned, so it matches up with the GASB definitions.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, so it's just, it's terminology that's slightly different than it used to be, but for all intents and purposes, it's still the same, still the same thing. It is a little bit fine-tuned, so you'll see the definitions here. So yours, if the city council would vote on it, it would fall under the committed bucket.
And unassigned is something that's not restricted, not committed, not assigned in any way. That would be the.
It's
main-
intended for a specific use, but hasn't been formally committed by the city council. Then you can have unassigned, which is, you can use for any purpose for that fund.
Do you have additional questions, Mr. Burgoyne?
No.
Thank you. Do any other members of council have questions? Mr. Gearbaugh?
Just a clarification on the summary of unrecorded possible adjustments. You're recommending where potential misstatements or whatever, especially on the recorded liabilities for, I guess it's deferred. It's with the, accrual for the benefits. I remember when I was reading this the other day.
Post-employment benefits?
Yes. It's approximately, I think, 100 and some odd thousand.
What page you on, Mr. Gearbaugh?
Page 15?
15.
So what that was is just a change in the calculation of the net pension asset. So you have had a pension asset for the past several years, and what this was, it kind of went back and put in an adjustment to that asset, so it almost didn't double count, because what was happening is you are getting less amount to pay from MERS. So let's say MERS originally says you need to pay $100,000 a year. Well, let's say that first year you paid $150,000. So MERS would look at that and reduce that amount and say, well, now you only need to pay us $90,000 a year. Well, what was happening is we were looking at that ARC, or that ARC was getting calculated as $90,000, when in reality, the true ARC is still $100,000, it's just they're making you pay 90. So really, it's just a change in the estimate. It's not really that you underfunded, it's just that there was a change in the estimate right at year end, and it's gonna get made up so that goes away in the next year.
Okay.
Mr. Burgoyne, do you have a additional question?
Yes, on page 11 in the recommendations under pension obligation bonds.
Yes.
Right now, MERS views our assets or our liabilities at an 8% amount. So in other words, we essentially lose 8% if we're not fully funded, 8% of the amount per year. That's not fully funded. So pension obligation bonds, are they coming in? How are they coming in? I mean, are they coming in at 8% per year or
interest rate?
4% per year? I mean, comparing it to how MERS treats us or how a bond would treat us.
Yeah, so the interest rate on the bonds is still very favorable. So this is where some would say, let's bond for it now when the money is relatively inexpensive.
Yeah.
So that way we can invest at the 8% or however much we can get on the investment. The downside of that is, and I've actually seen it at a couple communities in Michigan, is that you can do that, and then if something happens to the assets, so let's say you, and I'm going to use extreme dollars, but let's just say you bond $100 million. You take that money out, you have this huge liability now, and you throw it into an asset. And now you can say, well, I'm going to increase it by 8% every year. Now let's just say your investments go bad. And I've actually seen that happen before. And now let's just say it goes down to 20 million, your assets are at 20 million versus 100 million. So now you have this huge unfunded pension liability because your assets went down from 100 to 20, plus you have $100 million in debt. So that's where the flip side, that's where a lot of communities are very apprehensive about doing anything, because something could happen that you're going to just get a double negative. Now, on the flip side, you could get a positive as well.
My thought of what a community would do, in your slides, you showed that we have a $5 million unfunded liability, basically, with MERS. So if Saline bonded at 4.3%, let's use a number, and gave the $5 million to MERS, MERS would no longer charge us $5 million liability at 8%, so we're better off. And we just normally pay off a $5 million bond. At the same time, we have been unable to move our administration portion from defined benefits to defined liability because we were not above 80% funding with MERS. So going to 100% funding would be more than 80% funding. It would allow us to go from defined benefit to defined liability. We would pay 4.3% instead of the 8% calculation. It seems to me that the only downside to this is the transactions cost of actually doing the bond. But if you have a net amount for the interest, you know what that is. And if that net comes out to be around 4.3, it seems okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely positives and there's negatives. You know, another positive that you'll know what your costs are for the next so many years, because when you're bonding for it, they essentially become a straight line almost, you know, payment every year.
Which is less than our impact right now.
So again, it's hard to say. I wish I had a crystal ball and say, okay, this is what's going to happen in the marketplace, and take my, you know, I'll refinance my mortgage and everything and start investing because I know what's going to happen. But that's where there's a lot of uncertainties. But there's also a flip side that, you know, there could be a positive. I'm not saying don't do it, but I'm also saying, I'm basically saying evaluate it before, you know, pulling the trigger and something like that.
Well, changing from defined benefits to defined contribution is very progressive, so that would help us.
Absolutely.
Also. And we are at near historical low for interest.
Yeah, even though the interest rates have gone up a little bit, it's still historical lows. They can't go negative, I assume.
Are there additional questions for our guests? No, gentlemen, thank you very much. You always do an outstanding job, and that was certainly true this year. Appreciate your very thorough, thoughtful presentation. And I assume that if council members have additional questions or concerns, they're welcome to contact you directly.
Anytime.
Okay.
Thank you for your time, and thank you for the opportunity to serve as the auditors.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a safe trip back home, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you all for indulging us. I know that's not the most exciting thing to discuss, but it is of vital importance. So-
Spiced it up.
Yeah, you did. You did. Thank you very much.
One question.
Yes, Mr.
Do
Burgoyne.
you have an extra copy of your charts for the media? Well, yeah.
You can leave them right there, Martin. That's fine. Yep. We have somebody from the Post and from the Reporter. If they'd like a copy, they're welcome to it.
Yeah, she gave.
We move on to citizen comments on agenda items. Under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen may come forward at this time and make comment or question on an item that appears on this agenda. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested but not required to state his or her name and address for the record.
Mary Hess, Canterbury. I'm hoping that we have a copy of the audit at the front turnaround for the public. And the comments as far as regarding the holiday tree lighting and the holiday parade. I was wondering if the council could address at what point it was changed from the Christmas tree lighting and the Christmas parade. It has been said on Facebook that it offended maybe some people when it was the Christmas parade. But as I said, people take their Christmas pay, whether they're Christian or non-Christian, and I really feel that it is the Christmas tree and it is the Christmas parade. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hess.
My name is Kathy Dobrowolski, and my comments are related also to the holiday parade and tree on the agenda. I'm here tonight to respectfully request that the council, the Saline City Council, encourage the Saline Chamber of Commerce to change the name of Saline's holiday parade and tree back to Christmas parade and Christmas tree. I represent many Saline area residents who have grown tired of our country and our communities being taken over by the religion of political correctness. Some of us have participated in the parade and we don't understand why the names had to change in the first place. Was the Chamber of Commerce afraid of offending someone by using the word Christmas? What is so offensive about that word and that holiday? Is it the tiny babe in the manger that offends? Or perhaps the jolly fat man known as Santa Claus? or the carols played at that time of the year, or the ornaments and lights hung on evergreen trees. If any of these are offensive, then perhaps we shouldn't have a parade or tree at all, because all of the above are part and parcel of the Saline Parade and the downtown tree. Everything about the Saline Parade is related specifically to Christmas, including the various parade themes each year, such as a nostalgic Saline Christmas, the Christmas Story, Joy to the World, and this year's theme, A Charlie Brown Christmas. Same with an evergreen tree with lights and ornaments on it. It's a specific decoration of the Christmas holiday and no other. Many other communities don't find the use of the word Christmas offensive in naming their parades, decorations, or events during that time of the year. Lansing lights Michigan's official Christmas tree. Manchester has Christmas in the Village and lights a Christmas tree. And Plymouth has a Christmas Carol sing-along, to name just a few. Most farms where you go to cut an evergreen tree to bring home and decorate are called Christmas tree farms. If the chamber continues to name this December parade a holiday parade and not base the name on what the parade is really all about, then Saline should start calling their Memorial Day parade and their 4th of July parade holiday parades as well. If we're diluting everything with political correctness, it seems like the chamber should be consistent with it. The bottom line in all of this is that there really is no good or logical reason for having removed the word Christmas from the Saline parade or tree tradition. Political correctness isn't correct at all. It only causes conflict and ultimately censorship. Please ask the Chamber of Commerce to stop censoring the Saline December parade and tree and give them back their rightful names, the Saline Christmas Parade and Christmas Tree. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Are there additional citizen comments?
I'm Todd Carter, and the current Grand Knight from the Knights of Columbus here in Saline. And I'm guessing 10 to 12 years ago, the Saline Chamber of Commerce changed the name of the Christmas parade to the Holiday Parade. So yes, I'm addressing the parade again. It also changed the name of the Christmas tree to a holiday tree. And this appeared to be in response to the political correctness being forced upon the people by a very vocal minority. Times are changing, and the silent majority of Christians, as well as most of the religious and other minorities, now understand that they are protected by the Christian foundation of tolerance to all, and realize that a secular rule cannot protect them from the intolerance of a minority. Consequently, it is very welcome to see the Saline Chamber of Commerce standing up to protect the foundation of tolerance to all by considering to rename the Christmas parade back to its roots. We, the Knights of Columbus, Saline Council number 6674, stand with you in this decision and encourage you to rename the tree and parade a Christmas tree and a Christmas parade. And we ask the City Council to encourage them also. Our country is based upon a foundation of love and respect for each other. This is why for almost 400 years, people have come to our shores to get away from religious and other forms of persecution. This Christian ethic that provides equal standing before the law of all religious persuasions was codified in the Bill of Rights Addendum to our Constitution 224 years ago as the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Just as people come to America for a reason, people come to Saline for a reason. They're not coming to Saline just for the schools or the parks or the clean streets. They're coming to Saline for the stable environment and wonderful history that we embrace and bring forward into our future. This forward-looking attitude based on a firm foundation is why people are coming to Saline. And thank you for being a part of it and honoring Saline's heritage. The Saline Council of the Knights of Columbus, a Catholic fraternal organization, has, for the duration of this political correctness mania, been cheered by the bystanders of the parade as we carry our banners of Keep Christ in Christmas for the Christmas parade and One Nation Under God for the Memorial Day parade. We will continue to carry these banners as long as necessary. So please, if you would, ask the chamber to rename their parade. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carter.
Good evening. My name is Paul Dobrovolsky. I'm at 218 West Bemis Road in Saline. I'm asking the Saline Council to help bring Christmas back to Saline. About 10 years ago, the Saline Chamber of Commerce, for reasons which we believe to be political correctness, changed the name of the Christmas parade to Holiday Parade, and also changed the name of the city Christmas tree to the Holiday Tree. We are asking the city of Saline we are asking the city of Saline to voice their disagreement with the chamber on the naming of this parade and the tree. It is my belief that a parade that has themes related to Christmas and has floats with no other holiday theme should be called a Christmas parade. The same applies to the Christmas tree that has been an icon for Christmas for generations. The following two reasons appear to be common arguments for removing religious symbols or names from from governmental bodies or events. And the first is that it offends people, as we've heard. And a legitimate response to this is that we need to be open to all diverse forms of expression. The second reason is a misunderstanding of the words of Thomas Jefferson regarding his comments on the separation of church and state. His words have been incorporated into the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights of the United States. And to repeat Todd's comments, in this quote here, in essence, it states that the Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. If Christmas would be used in the name of the Saline parade or tree, it would not establish a religion. It merely states what the parade or tree consists of: Christmas floats, themes, ornaments. When Christmas is removed from the name of a parade or city tree, the Saline Chamber of Commerce is prohibiting the free exercise of a name that has religious but also secular meanings. Let's use common sense and convince the chamber to call a spade a spade. And if there are some Hanukkah or Kwanzaa entries for floats in this year's parade, I would recommend calling it the Christmas Hanukkah Parade or the Christmas Kwanzaa Parade. But it appears that the removal of the term Christmas from the Saline parade and the tree is just a silly response of political correctness. Please join us in convincing the Saline Chamber of Commerce to change the name of the Saline parade and the Saline tree to the Christmas parade and the Christmas tree. And also, while you're at it, you can like our Bring Christmas Back to Saline Facebook page to stay updated with pertinent information. And finally, to finish with a quote from George MacDonald: "The two pillars of political correctness are, one, willful ignorance, and two, a steadfast refusal to face the truth." Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Are there additional citizen comments on agenda items? No, well then, very quickly, it is the custom around here not to respond directly to citizens or groups who make comment during the citizen comment period of this agenda, but I will make a brief statement. Initially, the question was proposed to this body when a change was made, when the community transitioned from calling the parade and calling the Christmas parade, and transitioned from Christmas tree to holiday tree. And from the information I've been able to gather, that occurred in the early 2000s, late 1990s. So it predated my tenure as a member of council and the tenure of just about everyone up on this dais, as well as the current leadership of the Chamber of Commerce. I, for one, happen to agree. It is clearly, in my opinion, a Christmas parade. It features Santa Claus, it features elves, it features Christmas music. It was predicated and organized at a strategic time during the month of December to celebrate the holiday in which the vast majority of Saline citizens celebrate. However, reasonable and good people can certainly disagree on this issue, and we do have the incoming president of the Saline Chamber of Commerce, Shelley Rankin, in the back, and the executive director, Art Trapp, in the back. I'm of the understanding that they received your letter and will probably discuss it as a board. Ms. Rankin does an outstanding job serving this community, and Mr. Trapp has a long history of outstanding service to this community. It's not a decision that he can make. He's the managing day-to-day director, and this is ultimately a policy decision that will have to be considered by the board. And I am assuming that they will do so sometime in the not-too-distant future. Obviously, there's nothing that can be done to rectify this situation this year, but I'm sure the conversation and dialogue will continue. And I guess if anybody has anything further to add, I would welcome those comments. Otherwise, we will move on. No? Okay. Thank you all for coming tonight. We appreciate it. Okay. We move on to the consent agenda. The following consent agenda will normally be adopted without discussion. However, at the request of any citizen or council member, any item may be removed from the consent agenda for council discussion. I will be seeking a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended, noting the addition that Mr. Roth inserted at the beginning of the meeting this evening.
So moved. Support.
Moved by Gearbaugh to approve as amended and seconded by Councilmember Rhodes. There is no discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item 13-154. This will be a motion, this is a motion regarding the 2014 Saline Celtic Festival. This will be a motion to approve or not to approve the 2014 Celtic Festival event to take place in Mill Pond Park on July 11th and 12th, 2014, including authorization of the beer and wine tents, subject to the following conditions. One, that the Friends of the Celtic Festival Foundation provide a certificate of liquor liability insurance with the City of Saline as an endorsed additional insured party, subject to the approval of our city attorney. Two, that all security measures relative to beer and wine tents be under the purview of the police chief, and that the Celtic Festival Committee provide a designated driver plan to the police chief for review and approval prior to the event. Three, that all fees for police services and DPW services over and above regular hours, estimated at $2,200, be waived.
Motion to approve.
It's been moved by Burgoyne to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Peters. I know that we have a few members of the Celtic Festival executive team here this evening. Do you care to make any comment? You certainly don't need to? No? Okay. I think so. All right. Thank you. Mr. Peters, do you care to make any comment?
Yeah, just to say that the festival scope and content remains the same. It's an arts and cultural event. But how this festival is managed has really changed quite a bit in the last 3 years. As the city requested 3 years ago, it has become a 501(c)(3). It now has the Friends of the Festival component to it. And if we continue to progress like this and implement the suggestions that have been put forth to us tonight by the city treasurer and by Plant Moran, I think this will go a long way to improve our transactions and to perhaps solve a lot of confusion we may have had in the past. And to add to that, this festival was quite successful last year, and if we have maybe 2 or 3 more successful festivals as successful as that one is, the day will come we won't need to borrow any money from the city. It will be completely standalone, and there will be no risk at all to the city of Saline. So my hat's off to the volunteers and those who manage the festival. It's come a long way in 3 years.
Thank you, Mr. Peters. Are there additional comments? Mr. Gearbaugh.
I would like to just make one friendly amendment, and I don't know how friendly this is going to be. As I would like to have it with all of our festivals or any of the things that we support, I'd like to have a line added that says total cost support will be $9,246.64 estimated cost. We've been trying to identify what these activities cost the city, and basically it's being more transparent and open to the public so that we've already got that number, as long as Mr. Campbell agrees with that figure. Because we're waiving the overtime, but I still have a concern that we need to identify the specifics, that we are using taxpayers' dollars at some point as a lost opportunity cost, and that we should identify specifically what the city contributes towards these events, just to be public and forthcoming.
Is that number correct, Mr. Campbell?
That would be, yeah, that would be the highest, if you will, depending on the officers, but typically, yes, that would be a solid number.
Do you wish to word that in the form of an amendment, Mr. Gearbaugh?
Just to have an amendment, last sentence to read, total costs are estimated to be $9,247.
So your amendment would follow the, well, I'll just read it beginning at point 3. That all fees for police services and DPW service over and above regular hours estimated at $2,200 be waived, and that the total cost is estimated at $9,247.
Total city costs.
Total city cost.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm inserting the word total city, okay? So total city cost be estimated at $9,247.
I second that.
Okay. Let's first establish, all right, so it's been moved by Gearboss, seconded by Roth. Mr. Burgoyne, Mr. Peters, do you accept that as a friendly amendment?
I would like the word in kind in there, because some of those other costs you're going to pay anyway. You're going to have people that are doing something, just moved over to do this, they would have been paid anyway. So I would like the word in kind in there, and I would accept it.
So you would like it rephrased then that the total in-kind city cost is estimated at $9,247.
The total cost, including in kind,
Total cost including in-kind.
is estimated at 9,000,
Okay.
whatever. And that's acceptable to me.
That's acceptable.
You're fine with that, Mr. Gearboss?
Yep.
Mr. Roth, are you okay with that? All right, now I revert back to Mr. Peters. Are you comfortable with that
Yeah,
amendment?
I would agree with that. Just have to remember that we're being charged for an 8-hour day by police and DPW, but those police and DPW are doing something within city that day anyway. So what we're really after in-kind costs is the overtime above and beyond the typical cost.
All right, so the mover and seconder have accepted that as a friendly amendment, so it will be inserted then. Mr. Burgoyne?
Since it's a friendly amendment, don't we just have the original motion as amended?
Yes. Yeah, we're not going to vote separately on the
Okay.
amendment. Yep. Additional comments? I would just echo the sentiments expressed by my colleague, Mr. Peters, which are, we are moving in the right direction. And I think after maybe 2 or 3 good years and exceptional festivals, we'll be in a position where the Celtic Festival Committee can become its own independent, autonomous entity, which has been my goal and the goal of this council for a number of years. I do want to add that the event would not be possible without city support, but more importantly, it would not be a quality event if it were not for all of the volunteers, some of whom are in the audience this evening. And of course, our good colleague, Mr. Peters, demonstrates and contributes a great deal of passion and leadership to make the event it is today. So I just want to thank all of you. It's a great outlet for our citizens who want to give back, who want to contribute in the community, and it brings a lot of recognition, a lot of attention to this city. It's a great event, and I enthusiastically support the motion. Are there additional comments? No? Okay. Then it's been properly moved by Burgoyne, seconded by Peters, noting the amendment that was offered by Gearbaugh and Roth. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries unanimously. Moving on to new business item 13-156. This is a resolution for a mini grant application for the Celtic Festival. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the September 26, 2013 memo from Business Ambassador Kathy Korfman and to approve or not to approve the resolution for a mini grant application to the Ann Arbor Arts Alliance, the re-granting agency for Washtenaw County for the Michigan Council of Arts and Cultural Affairs, MCACA.
Move to
I move to
approve.
approve.
Okay, it's been moved by Gearbaugh and seconded by Councilmember Roth. Ms. Korfman, do you care to make any comment?
Staff is working on the application for the mini grant. We're requesting a $4,000 grant to go for the entertainment portion of the Celtic Festival. As a requirement of the application, we need a resolution from City Council showing their support.
Thank you, Mrs. Korfman. Are there any questions for staff? No? Thank you very much. Does anybody from the Celtic Festival executive team care to comment? You all good? Amber, please. Please.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to say thank you to the council and to the staff for their efforts in helping us to complete that mini grant, which we attained last year, and hopefully to get another one for the 2014. So just thank you for all of your help, and we've worked together with Mickey Joe and with Kathy, and been very, very happy with all of the support. So I just wanted to say thank you on behalf of the festival. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gearbox?
Just real quick, the one question why I mentioned the in-kind services in the other motion was because in this statement, you have a requirement of saying that the city must show the $4,000 of cash or in-kind. So we've got it officially in our documents so that if this is helpful and you're seeking this grant, it's documented.
Thank you, Mr. Gearbox.
Yep.
Additional comments? No? Then we'll proceed to vote. It's been moved by Gearbox, seconded by Roth to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item 13-157. This is the holiday tree lighting. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the application for community events / use of public ways from the Saline Area Chamber of Commerce for the annual holiday tree lighting ceremony, to acknowledge receipt of the October 2nd, 2013 memo from Public Work Director Fordyce and the September 11th, 2013 memo from Police Chief Rennick. To approve or not to approve the holiday tree lighting ceremony to take place on Friday, December 6, 2013 at 7 p.m. with approval to close the left turn lane onto North Ann Arbor Street. The closing of North Ann Arbor Street from Michigan Ave to the entryway of parking lot number 1, and the MDOT permit for the closing of the left turn lane on Michigan Avenue. 1, that the traffic engineer issue the required temporary traffic control orders. 2, that the required permit be obtained from MDOT for the closing of the turn lanes on Michigan Avenue. And 3, that the Chamber of Commerce provide a certificate of insurance with the city named as an endorsed additional insured party for this event. Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
It's been moved by Rhodes to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Peters. I know we have 2 guests from the Chamber of Commerce, incoming President Shelley Rankin and Art Trapp. Do you care to comment at all? Sure. Okay. Certainly don't need to, but if you'd like to.
Yes. Obviously, I'm Art Trapp, and this is Shelley Rankin, but I only get to wear this 2 times a year, once when I come before you and once when I get to do it on the parade day. So, and by the way, the Christmas or the holiday parade is the only parade that the Chamber does. We used to do several other parades, but we have limited that activity just to the parade that we do in December. The tree lighting for this year will follow the same pattern as we have done in the past. We have the kids from Woodland Meadows making ornaments, and I've also asked the art students in the Saline schools to come forth, and because of our theme is somewhat unique, a Charlie Brown Christmas, I've asked them to submit whatever artwork they decide makes fun to them, or a poem or something that we can use to decorate Santa's Village. And then anything left over or excess of that will go into the various merchants' windows throughout the downtown area. So.
Perfect. Okay. Shelley, do you care to make any comment? No? Okay. Are there any questions for our guests? Mr. Rhodes?
Is it safe to assume that you're going to have something better than a Charlie Brown tree?
There's an individual married to this young lady here who gets to decide that. I only go along as a passenger, so yes, we'll have something better than Charlie Brown tree.
Thank you.
Well, now that we know the theme.
Mr. Gearbaugh, did you have a question?
No, it's not towards you, it's just for the motion.
Oh, okay. Okay. Any other questions for our guests? No? Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Mr. Gearbaugh?
Just a similar type of thing that we identify that total estimated city costs are $4,465. If we could add that to the same motion.
Okay. Tell me that number one more time.
$4,465.
Okay. And word it the same, that the total city in-kind cost is estimated?
Yeah, that's the same motion, same wording as we had in the last one for the Celtic.
Okay. So the mover was Rhodes. Are you comfortable with that, Mr. Rhodes?
That was the figure that was in our initial agenda that we were given by the city clerk, which indicated that was the total cost of the DPW police services in addition to the overtime. So it's the full amount, same identical dollar figure that we used in the previous one for the Celtic Festival.
Yeah, that's for
Oh.
the parade. This one has almost no expense.
Sorry, I skipped it. Never mind, it'll be for the next one. My mistake.
You want to add 160 bucks?
That's fine if that goes for that one.
Okay. Sure. So the total city in-kind cost is estimated at 100 and what did we say?
160.
160?
I got reading the other motion.
No,
My
it's all right.
apologies.
I was confused as well.
I thought it was the total cost including in-kind, because the total cost is not all in-kind. The total cost including
That's right.
in-kind.
That's right. Excuse me. Total cost, including in-kind, is estimated at $161. That's good, Mr.
Yep.
Gearbaum? Mr. Rhodes, you're comfortable with that?
I accept that.
Mr. Peters, you accept that?
Yes.
Okay. Let me ask this question before we proceed, since there appears to be a consensus developing. In the future, when we have petitioners who are requesting approval of community events like the tree lighting or like the Celtic Festival, do we want to see the verbiage change to include the entire amount? Obviously, Mr. Gearbaum, I think, is in favor of that. Mr. Ross would be in favor of that. Mr. Rhodes?
I would support that if you're going to
Okay.
add it anyway.
Okay. Mr. Burgoyne's good with that. Mr. Peters?
Well, the only question I have is that when we do that, you're talking about, let me make sure I understand this. We're putting in the cost of, say, a DPW and the in-kind service, their overtime. However, like the parade or the festival and everybody else, the DPW is going to work 8 hours a day that day anyway. So how can we tack that cost on to their in-kind service?
Well, we're using that service to do that performance, so we can't, we're spending 8 hours, if that's what they're identifying. My understanding is that all these numbers that we're getting are specific efforts that are being attributed to these individual events. So we're just identifying specific cost to it, because otherwise what they would be doing, you're right, the city's paying them, but they would be doing something else, fixing or repairing or some other process. So we are spending true dollars for a function, and we're foregoing something else by doing that.
I understand.
And I just want to make sure that we're identifying it, because everyone's always asking me, how much are we putting on it? Here we are, we can tell them that it's a reasonable figure. It's not something that is.
Right.
Trying to equate
But
a dollar.
It's not really additional cost to taxpayers, because the DPW will be assigned to that event for that day, and that's just the way their work assignment comes out from their supervisor. The cost of taxpayer is the same, so it's not like an additional cost to taxpayer.
But if we get pressed, we would have to eliminate this cost.
True,
because
true. But it's
It
kind
is
of
a true
semantics.
cost. Yes.
Okay. Ms. Tahar?
Yeah, I would just like to add, since you're about to ask me anyway, that I think it's good to include this in all the events as an indication that of the level that the city is supporting the events. Not that it's a negative piece of information, but it reflects the fact that the city has this as a priority and is willing to invest real dollars into the execution of these events or putting on of these events. So I wouldn't see it as a negative or punitive, but just this represents what the city is willing to invest in making these, in helping to make these things happen.
All right, so there appears to be a consensus, and when the city manager and clerk and I work on agendas in the future, we'll insert the appropriate verbiage and then the actual dollar amounts as well. Mr. Trapp, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that, I understand the total dollar amount, and I also agree that we would be paying these folks to do this anyway, paying their salaries anyway, but in the past, one of the things that stuck out in my mind is what is over and above the normal 8 hours or whatever, and I think that number should be included in your resolution, maybe in parentheses or whatever, because that's the true cost of what you're waiving versus...
And it is, actually. We're adding a new sentence, so that in the item.
So both numbers should be in there.
And they are.
Okay.
Yeah, but separated.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So we have an addition that was acceptable to the mover and the seconder, basically the identical verbiage from new business item 13-154. The only thing that's different is the amount, which is $161. Is everyone clear on that? Yes? Okay. Is there any additional discussion regarding this motion? No? Okay. Then all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries. It is a great event. It's open to the public, again, 7 p.m. on Friday the 6th, and I believe there's some light refreshments served as well.
Yes, there will be. We have some Benny's cookies. We have some hot chocolate from the Drowsy Parrot, and we're going to have music as soon as I can get a hold of the two Dougs that played last year, and we'll be gone.
Great. All right. It's a wonderful time in downtown Saline, so I hope you'll join us again, December 6th at 7 p.m. We move on to new business item 13-158. This is the holiday parade. Excuse me. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the application for a community event / use of public ways from Art Trapp, Saline Area Chamber of Commerce for an annual holiday parade. To acknowledge receipt of the September 19th, 2013 memo from Fire Chief Heft, the October memo from Public Works Director Fordyce, and the September 11th, 2013 memo from Police Chief Rennick. To approve or not approve the 2013 holiday parade to be held on December 7th, 2013 in downtown Saline, and to authorize or not authorize the use of parking lots 1 and the closing of Michigan Avenue, North and South Davenport Street, West McKay Street, North Lewis Street, as well as the use of 3 parking spaces in downtown and the MDOT permit for the closing of Michigan Avenue. No parking along Michigan Avenue from Hall Street to Lewis Street from 4 p.m. until Michigan Ave is reopened after the parade, subject to the following conditions. 1, that the traffic engineer issue the required traffic control order for the street closings and the use of the parade route. 2, that the required permit for the closing of Michigan Ave be obtained through MDOT. 3, that the Chamber of Commerce provide a certificate of liability insurance with the City of Saline as an endorsed additional party. And 4, that the fees for police and DPW services, which are over and above the normal operating cost estimated at $2,418, be waived. Mr. Gearbaugh, I'm going to turn it over to you to be the mover so you can also insert the additional verbiage.
Yeah, and I'll move it to approve and to authorize, and then with the final sentence being total cost, including in-kind, to be $4,465, estimated to be $4,465.
Okay. Is there a second to that motion? Seconded by Mr. Rhodes.
I would support it and with an additional amendment if I could.
Okay, please.
Because the application for the event says holiday Christmas everywhere throughout it. And I believe that our motion should say the same thing.
Mr. Gearbaugh, do you have any problem with that?
I'm fine with it being as that's how it appears.
Okay. So we're going to change it then. Anytime you see the phrase holiday, it's going to be holiday / Christmas parade.
And that's because the application is written that way.
Yep.
Right. It was intended to write that way, too.
Okay.
We will definitely take back the comments that were made tonight to City Council, to the Chamber Board, which meets on Wednesday, and provide them with the same information that was provided here tonight. It's not a decision I make or Shelley makes, it's a board decision. So.
Right. Well, the other thing that I would have added, Mr. Trapp, is that, I think that City Council should tread very lightly in this area from the perspective that I don't think it's always appropriate for one entity to dictate or command or implore another entity to take a particular course of action or adopt a particular policy. I would be sort of taken aback if the Chamber Board did that to City Council, and therefore I think the same standard should apply if the City Council were to make a dictate to the Chamber Board. So I appreciate your willingness to take that issue back and have it discussed at the Executive Board, and they'll determine what they deem appropriate. Yep. So thank you. All right, so the motion has been amended in 2 ways from the way it was originally stated. We've added Christmas after the word holiday anytime the phrase holiday parade appears, which I believe is only once. And then Mr. Gearbaugh, of course, added an addendum at the end acknowledging the amount of $4,465. Mr. Burgoyne?
Yeah, I'm actually pleased with the holiday / Christmas moniker because it's more inclusive. It doesn't bar the thought that there could be other religions other than Christian. If everybody in this room is Christian, that's fine, but there may be others that have another religion that may want to participate in the future, like next year, especially when this is brought up publicly right now. It's possible that somebody next year might want to come and have a non-Christian, representation. So I'm happy with the word holiday / Christmas. It allows a little bit of openness.
Thank you, Mr. Burgoyne. Are there additional comments? Mr. Rhodes?
I would just say that as an individual, I would honor whatever decision the Chamber of Commerce makes relative to the naming of this event.
Thank you.
Additional comments?
I concur with Mr. Rhodes.
All right. There's nothing further, then it's been properly moved and seconded to approve and authorize, acknowledging the two amendments. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item 13-159. This is holiday parade banner request. Thank you both for being here, by the way. Appreciate it. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of a memo from Saline Main Street Manager Bob Rosenberger and the October 2013 memo from Public Works Director Fordyce to approve or not approve the Saline Chamber Holiday Parade banner request to be hung by DPW in the 4-block historic district as requested by Saline Main Street. Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved by Gearboss, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Tahar to approve. I know that our Managing Director of Saline Main Street is here. Mr. Rosenberger, do you care to make any comment this evening?
DPW.
Okay. Are there any questions? Yes, Mr. Burgoyne?
So we're attaching banners to private property, is that the case? And if we're attaching to private property, what type of liability waivers are we thinking of, or how is that being dealt with?
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with that we're going to apply these to private property.
These are just on our light poles.
Yeah, they're on the light poles.
Oh, these are on light poles?
Right.
Oh, forget it.
Oh, our flags.
You clear now?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Roth?
I just want to call to his attention for is be loyal, spend local. The red banner that you show in our display, the bottom you have Saline Chamber Holiday Parade. Do you have these already purchased, or do you want to confer with the chamber if a possible name change?
It's my understanding that there's no name change for this year, or are you going to, I don't know.
But this is worded in such a way you can use it year after year. It says first Saturday in December.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for us to use them multiple times,
Right. But
you
these
may
are-
want to wait, see if there is a name change.
I believe we already have these in our possession.
Okay.
Mr. Rhodes, did you have a
That
question?
was the same comment I was going to make, but if they already exist, it's.
Kind of a moot point.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Any other questions for our Main Street Director? No? Bob, thank you for being here this evening.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Additional comments? No? Well, that's been properly moved by Councilmember Gearboss, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Tahar to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries unanimously. I may have excused you a bit too early, Bob, because you're up again in the subsequent motion. This is new business item 13-160, Saline Scarecrow Contest. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the memo from Saline Main Street Manager Bob Rosenberger and Dr. Rob Orr, and to approve or not approve the Saline, second annual Scarecrow Contest, and to approve or not to approve the display of scarecrows in downtown Saline. I butchered that one. Is there a motion?
Move to approve and approve.
Okay, it's been moved by Peters to approve and approve. Is there a second?
Support.
Support by Councilmember Rhodes. Do you care to comment at all?
Well, the first annual Saline Scarecrow Contest was run by Dr. Rob Bohr, a chiropractor here in our downtown area. They had, I believe, 4 scarecrows, and he did it solely on his property. He approached Saline Main Street to ask if we might do it and be involved, sort of a counter partnership, or a co-partnership, I should say. And we thought it was kind of a nifty idea. It adds a little spirit to downtown, little fall holiday spirit. And we already have several people or businesses who, if we do this contest, are willing to participate. Mangiamo has said they would, Hartman Insurance, Benito's, Bill's Barbershop. And we've talked to the schools, and they're interested in perhaps participating as well. So I think we'll have enough scarecrows to make it kind of fun and interesting. And I'd be real surprised, by the way, if 212 Arts doesn't put some artistic spin on this and have a scarecrow or two as well. So I think it could be a lot of fun. We want to do some voting, public voting, kind of like we did with the Leather Bucket Alley project. And that's always fun to get the community involved. And we'll award small prizes that are given by downtown businesses to 3 winners. So.
Thank you. Any questions, Mr. Burgoyne?
Not a question, but I just want to say on the next item, I would like that split in A and B. A to just acknowledge receipt, and then B.
Are you talking about new business item 13-161?
I'm talking about the next item.
Yeah, well, let's hold tight on that for just 1 second. Let's finish discussion and voting on this item, and then we can deal with that request when we consider that motion. Other questions for Mr. Rosenberger or comments? No? Bob, again, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Seems like a great initiative. Thank you for your work on this. Additional comments? No? Then we'll proceed to voting. It's been properly moved by Councilmember Peters, seconded by Rhodes to approve and to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries unanimously. Moving on to new business item 13-161. This is revocation of real property portion for Digipod. This motion will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the October 3rd, 2013 memo from City Treasurer Bennett and to adopt or not adopt a resolution to request that the State Tax Commission revoke the real property portion for the Industrial Facilities Tax Exemption Certificate number 2005-561 for Digipod Incorporated and the Industrial Facilities Tax Exemption Certificate number 2005-561 for Quick Print Incorporated, and to direct staff to recover the proper portion of the abated real property tax according to the tax abatement agreement.
Motion to acknowledge receipt.
Okay.
And I want to split that into A and
Okay.
B.
So Mr. Burgoyne, Councilmember Burgoyne is going to move a motion to acknowledge receipt of the memo. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Gearbaugh. I will turn it over to our city treasurer, Ms. Bennett.
I believe there might be an amendment needed also to that resolution. The certificate number for Quick Print is a different number.
Okay.
I was just reading that. So I believe that where it says for just exemption certificate number, the second,
Yep.
that should be 21132. 2011-032.
032, okay. And I'll restate that when we consider that portion of this, of the original motion.
Yeah, 2005-561 is Quick Print. The first one is Quick Print, the second one is to Digipod.
Oh, and so they need
So
to
it's
be-
the other way
They're just
around.
reversed, yeah.
Okay. I'll reread that portion of the motion. Thank you, Ms. Bennett.
Yep.
Do you want to go over briefly go over your memorandum dated October the 3rd?
Sure, just for some history for the council's information, we received notice last year that the owner of Digipod had purchased a building out in Tecumseh, Michigan, and was discussing moving his business out there. We encouraged him to keep us in, to let us know what was going on and what his intent and everything was, and that we would work with them to help them transfer any of the personal property and work with them on the real property. We have we have been working with them on the clawback because we were advised that that building is empty. Our city assessor did go out and do an inspection on the property, and there is no business there. We were advised by Digipod that they had been told by the state of Michigan that we needed to revoke the real property. The personal property would automatically transfer, so we called the State Tax Commission, and at that time was advised that Digipod could request it themselves, or the revoking of it, or we could do it through proper council resolution. At that time, I contacted Digipod once again, asked them if the city itself would like to try to entice businesses to come into that building. We could leave that certificates on the property if they would advise us of what their intent was. We have not heard anything as of this time. If we do not revoke the certificate by December 31st of this year and take it to the State Tax Commission, it will automatically stay on the roll for another year at the exempt. So therefore, it did go to the special projects, and special projects did approve the revocation, and that's been sent to the City Council. And there is no language in our current agreements that talk about revoking for moving. However, it is authorized and, it is recommended that if they're not there, the state of Michigan says that, we do have the authority to revoke that certificate.
Thank you, Ms. Bennett. Are there questions for our city treasurer? Mr. Burgoyne.
Well, what was on these certificates or on other certificates, there's some personal property involved, apparently.
The personal property automatically transferred with no input from the city of Saline.
Correct. However, the city of Saline, when businesses move out, we have some clawback language. Now, I did request a copy of the agreements, but I haven't seen those yet. In the clawback, both real and personal can be clawed back.
Yes, sir. And the clawback letter and all that information has been forwarded up to Clark Hill for review and has been also forwarded and reviewed by DigiPod at this time.
Okay, so the motion is incorrect in the last line. To direct staff to recover the proper portion of the abated property, the word real should be dropped. So it could be.
It's real and personal that we are calling that.
Real and personal. So that was my issue, was the word real in the final line.
Okay.
And also, are there, besides these two certificates, are there any other certificates for quick print or Digipod on personal property that are different certificate numbers?
No, sir.
All
The
right.
only other one that they had expired December 30th of 2012.
Okay.
These are all of them.
Okay. All right, so in the next motion, I want to drop the word real so that staff can look at both real and personal in the clawback.
Okay. Well, I'll reread the latter part of the original motion and give you the first opportunity to move it, Mr. Burgoyne, when we're done with this motion.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
Are there additional questions for our city treasurer? No? Ms. Bennett, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Additional comments regarding the acknowledgement of the city treasurer's memorandum dated October the 3rd. Hearing none, it's been properly moved by Burgoyne, seconded by Gearbaugh. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries unanimously. This second motion will be a motion to adopt or not adopt a resolution to request the State Tax Commission to revoke the real property portion for the Industrial Facilities Tax Exemption Certificate number 2011-032 for Digipod Incorporated, and the Industrial Facilities Tax Exemption Certificate number 2005-561 for Quick Print Incorporated, and to direct staff to recover the proper portion of the abated property tax according to the tax abatement agreement. Is that good, Mr. Burgoyne?
Absolutely. Motion to adopt.
Okay, it's been moved by Burgoyne to adopt. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Tahar. Any discussion? Mr. Roth.
The only question I have we have some resolutions here, and the resolutions just deals with real property. And I don't know whether we need resolutions for our personal property.
No, we do not. My motion stays only real, because the personal property went to the new location, so we don't need that in the first part of the motion.
We did verify that with the state of Michigan when we called them.
Well, the reason I asked the question is because in the discussion before, in dropping real, you said that was real and personal.
In the clawback.
In the clawback, right.
Right. The motion as read by the mayor is correct. That's
So for
what
clarification's sake, there is the revoking of the certificate, which gives them the exemption on the tax roll. There is also, in addition to the fact, because they have left the city before their certificate was to expire, in the agreement, we have written that if they leave prior to the time that it expires, they have to pay us a percentage back of the taxes that they were abated. That's the clawback that Mr. Burgoyne is referring to. And that clawback is going to be on real and the personal property. So we added personal to the clawback amount, but we are only revoking the real amount because the real amount is the only one that would stay here in Saline. Everything else has moved to Tecumseh. Is that clearer? Maybe?
So this does not address clawback at all?
No, those resolutions are basically just to revoke the exemption that is currently on our tax rolls.
Thank you.
Okay?
Mr. Mayor.
Please, Mr. Burgoyne.
Okay, in terms of that, it would be acceptable to me in the last line to say to recover the proper portion of the abated real and personal property tax according to the tax abatement agreement. Instead of removing real, we could say real and personal in that location.
I don't see any reason to oppose that, so unless there are objections from members of council, we'll make that modification.
That makes it more clear.
Okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Modification will be made without objection then, Mr. Burgoyne.
Yes, sir.
Are there any additional comments, actually, any questions for Ms. Bennett while I still have her up at the podium?
It's okay. You
No?
exercise.
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Bennett. All right, any additional comments regarding the amended motion? No, then it's been properly moved by Burgoyne, seconded by Tahar to adopt. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries unanimously. We move on now to discussion items. First up is commission, committee, and task force reports from members of council. No? I was hoping that either Ms. Tahar or Mr. Roth might enlighten us about our cemetery task force meeting last Thursday.
I'll give it a try.
Take a stab, Mr. Roth.
The task force met and went over several items. One of the larger items was that they are looking into marking off the Orange Risden House, and it come to a consensus that it would be something like a buildup of the foundation of four corners, and one of them would have a plaque listing what the foundation's all about. So that was a consensus agreement on it, and there's lots of discussion far as what improvements may be needed far as within the mausoleum itself. They also approved far as some signage to go up with it. An individual is willing to donate a large sign that will explain some of the history of the cemetery and the people who are in it and the different portions of the cemetery. So there's two different signages, marking of the foundation, and then the other one would be far as overall information about the cemetery. A third marking would coming in the future, near future, would be marking the, let's say that, I'm trying to think of the right word.
Potter's Fields.
The Potter's Fields, kind of, the cemetery has 3 different Potter's Fields, and we'd like to be able to mark those locations. So, and we also had information from the attorney far as what can be done for restoration of stones and monuments and that type of stuff, so we have a much clearer understanding. So we've moved very positive directions in making the cemetery more visible to the public and more understandable.
Yep, very good, Mr. Roth. And actually, to his latter point about a policy relating to the maintenance and repair and cleaning, I guess, of old headstones, that's something that's still being looked at. We're going to have our legal team at Clark Hill research that a little bit more and come back with a recommendation and something tangible for the group to digest at our next meeting, and then that will be discharged, hopefully, to City Council for review and approval. But I think it's very important that we consider something like that in a very thorough, deliberative manner, but also I think it's important to have something like that on our books.
I want to add, far as it appears that the cost for marking the foundation and for the signage would be at no cost to the city, but we'll have DPW help and support far as actually constructing the markings for the house.
Great. Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Roth. Mr. Tahar, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
I think that covered everything.
Yep, very good. Thank you, Mr. Roth. Well, if there are no other commission, committee, or task force reports, we move on to reports and other announcements. Mr. Rhodes?
I'd like to report that the Saline Area Historic Society celebrated harvest time at the farm on Sunday. It was fairly well attended. Over 200 people came in. And a good time, I think, was had by all who came. We did close a little bit early because the rain started to come down. And Mary Laronis was one of the volunteers that was there. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. Ms. Tahar?
As you've heard from me before, this coming Sunday, October 13th at 4 p.m. in City Council chambers, we will have a 10th anniversary celebration with a small group of visitors from our sister city of Lindenberg, Germany. The public is invited. We encourage you to attend. The mayor of Lindenberg is traveling to Saline specifically for this occasion. He's flying in on Saturday and leaving again on Tuesday. So this is clearly an important occasion for him, and we hope as many people as possible will join us for that occasion. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Tahar. Just to echo that, we'd love to see as many members of the community turn out for that welcoming ceremony. It will take place here Sunday afternoon in council chambers, and light refreshments will be served. Mr. Roth.
On that same day at 2 p.m., the Saline Area Historical Society has one of their educational programs held in the Brecken Room at the library. The topic is going to be the 150th anniversary of Henry Ford. So we have he's the presenter, presented the program during the celebration at the Rentschler Farm. He'll be back giving us a new twist at it. And I want you to know that Henry Ford did play a big role in some of Saline's economy.
Thank you, Mr. Roth. Are there additional reports or announcements? No? Okay. Then we move on to an update on the Leather Bucket Alley. I'll turn it over to Mr. Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I alluded last week, I was waiting on a conversation with the owner of Brecken Grill, and so what I've gleaned from that is he, well, if anybody's ever been by there, you've seen that he's removed his tables and chairs, and his interest is allowing the current lease that expires in March of 2014 to expire. And so my next step, and again I had that conversation with him this past Friday, wanting to discuss with the other businesses that have interest in that. Of course, you have Mangiamo that currently has a lease, and then also Benito's that have expressed interest in that. So my next step is to discuss with them, and then at this point see if that's agreeable, and then of course they would have to apply for that lease in the spring when it expires. So that's the update that I have currently, unless there's any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Campbell? No? Okay. Then we move on to the two items that Mr. Burgoyne added to the discussion portion of our agenda this evening. The first one is a TIFA budget item. Mr. Burgoyne?
Yes, I have attached here the October 2nd memo on TIFA. Does everybody have that? Okay. So I was just asked last time how TIFA was going to pay for its projects this year and which lines might be used. I did notice that there's a $100,000 line for roadside. There's also a $50,000 line for lighting. There's also a projected fund balance of over $50,000, which makes a couple of $100,000 right there. There's already, I think, about $30,000 budgeted for Woodland Drive, and there's a gap of about 150. So I was just wondering what the response has been so far, what the thought has been so far on that.
Good. Can we turn over to you, Mr. Campbell?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Mayor. As far as the, well, let me back up. The original bid for doing the woodland portion they're working on right now, from industrial up to just the north side of the Davco property. Originally, the estimate was around $335,000 for the project, and most of those dollars coming out of the major street funds. We had designated, because it is, as Mr. Burgoyne alluded, it is in the TIFA district. So at that point, we had allocated 10% of $33,500. Bids came back very favorable, about $183,000, and so that would, if we were going to maintain that 10%, of course, would knock it down to a little over $18,000 contribution from TIFA. And certainly, while I do agree we want to use as much of the TIFA dollars as we can, I think for instance, the 100,000 roadside portion that's, in my thought, again, and of course, any change, of course, would need to go through the Tifa board, but more than that, I think the 100,000 is vital for the upcoming design and potential grant match for the upcoming potential streetscape project in 2018 with MDOT when they come, hopefully will be coming through in 2018. And so that's why we have not made a change to that significant portion, or proposed to make a change to that significant portion. The others, again, as Deputy Treasurer McDonough's memo shows, the year-end reserve remains at $51,326. We want to be cautious. We don't believe it's prudent to spend down below that. But that's where we're at now. If again, the original concept was 10% of the cost coming from TIFA. If that's why we didn't propose any changes. The 33.5, which was originally budgeted, which would not quite double that, but we think that would be appropriate as well.
Okay, Mr. Burgoyne.
And the cost for Ann Arbor Street was budgeted at $150,000. How did that bid come in?
It hasn't been bid yet. It won't be bid until the spring by the state.
Okay. Well, the issue is that if TIFA doesn't pay its way, it pushes that over to the taxpayers to push up the taxes. So here, this is a new chapter for the city for TIFA not to even pay its own way. Don't we have a streetlights project in here also?
No, streetlights came through in FY13. So that's why I've been committed. There's nothing in FY14 budget for streetlights.
Okay. There is $50,000 here for development land preparation. You could use that. I think that we need to be fiscally responsible as a council. And we need to be very cautious about using extra tax dollars towards development areas like TIFA and LDFA and so forth. Those areas have always been a benefit to the city, not a net cost. And this would be a real change in philosophy where an economic development area becomes a net cost to the taxpayer and pushes the taxes up. This is a big deal. This is a sea change right here if this goes through. Now, there is enough money in this budget to have TIFA pay its own way. And now the design for the 2018 streetscape, when does that have to be spent?
We're going to be meeting hopefully in the very near future with Main Street, with their design team to begin that. So we should be kicking that off in the next handful of months to move forward on that project to be ready for the 2018.
So a streetscape project, which I imagine will cost a fair amount of money, and that will come from tax dollars. So why can't the design come from tax dollars for the streetscape?
Isn't a major portion of the design in the TIFA district?
Correct.
So I thought.
A major portion is in the TIFA district.
Yeah, the whole downtown.
Well, in the past, TIFA has always paid its way. And I see this as a problem that this is pushed off onto the taxpayers. This is a real change in philosophy, big change.
May I make a statement?
Yes, I'm sorry, Mr. Gearbaugh.
We've also used TIFA dollars to support the rec center and some other items that were outside of the TIFA district. So I'd rather we be a little more cautious and to be more proactive in redeveloping our areas. The $50,000 I know that we have aside for land development was potentially with the hope of 147 being developed fairly, or potentially giving any kind of support for that. I believe that's part of it. I've always had a question, and I was looking at that same figures today, was the $100,000 that we charge TIFA for administrative costs. And I've always wondered how that figure was derived and whether that one is...
That's in the TIFA plan that's stated. That's a legal amount that we just have to do it.
Which is an interesting figure just from the perspective, I'm always curious as to how much administrative stuff. There's a lot of figures that go back and forth that would be interesting to understand from your perspective of how you're saying that this is a shift. I'm just wondering if we don't use our dollars in the major road funds, why we can't use those for anything else either. So we're both, it's kind of the same type of thing. I think it's just prioritizing what we're doing, and if we have other items within the TIFA, it's not necessarily that we're shifting it back onto the taxpayers. It's just we have different...
Well, it is a shift because you stated that TIFA helped to support the rec center, which actually otherwise would be a net cost to the taxpayers. So in the past, it has reduced some of the net cost of the rec center
to
the taxpayers. So that's actually helped the taxpayers in the past. But now we're going over to the other side where we're adding on to the taxpayers. This is totally different from the past. Now, in the past, we've sometimes included TIFA payments in a bond, for example, if you bonded. So this is a big change.
But if we're actually contributing dollars to the project, you're saying we should put more towards it, but what's the basis for putting more money towards it? How are you basing
TIFA projects have been funded by TIFA in the past, period. And TIFA has also done some community enhancement in addition to paying its own way. But here, where TIFA is not paying its own way, it's adding extra taxes to the taxpayers.
But what's the fair weight on a project of 100 and whatever the figure was that Mr. Campbell was nominating?
180 or whatever.
On 180, he was saying 10% of it. So what's the fair weight of TIFA contributing towards a $180,000 project?
180,000. That's the Woodland Drive is in TIFA.
Right.
TIFA pays for TIFA projects always in the past, but now majority of the cost, 90%, looks like it's being shifted onto additional taxes.
But if we use those dollars for some other project within the city, yet still use our restricted dollars that are in major roads, I'm trying to get the shift here, because I know there's that issue with what we're collecting over what we collect from the other taxing units, whatever. But maybe Mr. Campbell can address it a little bit.
Well, I don't know if I'll answer the question, but I guess the monies allocated towards Woodland Drive are TIFA dollars and major street dollars, not general fund dollars. And so the streetscape project, which is in the TIFA district, would be what I am proposing, that all that 100,000 and maybe more over the next couple of years, and that's yet remains to be seen with the LDFA TIFA task force that's working on that plan. So that may or may not come out, but that's certainly what I would recommend. You'll be utilizing that money in the TIFA district as well. So I guess I apologize for seeing that concern that you have.
Well, the concern is not that, the concern is that TIFA is not paying its way. In the past, TIFA has always paid its way. Now, sometimes there have been bonds, and TIFA's paid part of a bond. Now, you said that major street money does not come out of the general fund, but major street money, the majority more than half of the funds from major streets are funded by taxpayers. The taxpayers have to pay for bonds that are not in TIFA areas. So if you had a bond and were including Woodland Drive and the Main Street project in a bond, and TIFA were paying annually towards a bond, that would be fine. TIFA could pay its way that way. But somehow this hasn't been lined up for TIFA to pay its way. TIFA is not paying its way. This is a big sea change.
Well, let me do this, or let me suggest this rather, because Mr. Campbell alluded to it. And as all of you are aware, we have an LDFA TIFA task force that I commissioned as the chair of the Economic Development Boards several months ago. That consists of Mr. Campbell, our business ambassador, Ms. Korfman, Mr. Gearbaugh is on that body, as well as the current president of the Chamber of Commerce, the executive director of the Chamber of Commerce, two other members of the LDFA and TIFA board, and Mitch Rhodes, who owns Quantum Signal. And they're looking at a number of things, including how best to utilize some existing TIFA dollars and to prioritize those for future purposes. So I think perhaps when that document or when their analysis and recommendations is provided to the economic development boards and to city council would probably be the appropriate time to have a more thoughtful, thorough discussion on this matter.
If Mitch Rhodes and the other people on that board recognize that Woodland Drive is in the TIFA area, if they include that as part of the TIFA projects, yes, Main Street, Michigan Avenue is in the TIFA area, but Woodland Drive is also in the TIFA area.
Mr. Gearbaugh, that group is meeting again in a week, 2 weeks?
Next week from Tuesday.
Would you be sure to bring up some of Mr. Burgoyne's concerns and suggestions?
Yep.
And of course, it's a public meeting, Mr. Burgoyne. If your schedule permits, they would welcome your attendance. Okay?
If their thought goes through bonding and being able to cover expenses that way, if you have a project, you can bond as far back as 6 months. But TIFA has always paid for its own projects in the past.
Okay. Thank you. Do you want to talk now about your final discussion item?
I had a question on this one.
Excuse me, Mr. Roth.
Last year, we did a major part of Woodland Drive. How was that financed?
Through TIFA dollars.
The entire project?
Oh, sorry, that's right, thank you, and a grant.
Okay, then I fall in line with Councilman Burgoyne. Why isn't the second part of it handled the same way?
Again, from my perspective, we're trying to spread out the TIFA dollars where they can go.
Right, and then if you will recall back when we were doing our, not to belabor this point anymore, but back when we were having our budgets discussion, we presented a chart to the boards about the fund balances in each account, and it was this council's direction to get all of those fund balances. If you recall, we took some of the fund balance from the solid waste account. We took some of the fund balance from the fire special assessment account to offset the amount coming from the general fund. So our goal was to get the fund balance percentages back down, all within line to our fund balance policy. Currently, at the time we were talking about the budget process, our projected FY13 fund balance for major streets was 109%. So therefore, when we did the budgeting process, we felt that it would be, and TIFA fund balance was at 25, close to that. So we're trying to do, as the council recommended, tweaking those fund balances down to they're all in the same category. So that was the original thought behind using major street money to pay for a major street and then asking for TIFA for a contribution because the fund balance differences. So at this point, it's using fund dollars, taxpayer dollars that has already been collected and is in the reserves.
Thank you, Ms. Bennett.
Mr. Mayor.
Please, Mr. Burgoyne.
The fund balance policy is for non-restricted funds. Street funds are restricted to streets.
Woodland Drive is a street in major.
It is, but our the policy on making things fairly even with regards to the general fund are those things that are linked or somehow related to the general fund. For example, the fire and the recreation, those things that relate to the general fund, not the restricted amounts.
Ms. Burgoyne, do you want to address your final item, low-cost funds for sewer construction?
Yes. Actually, I have two things. During the audit presentation, I noticed that what we got as audit numbers in projections about a week or two ago did not match the numbers. So I'm wondering whether that should be looked at and we could have an update of the general fund projection. The item that I did request was the city applied for low-cost construction funds for the sewer projects. We have sewer projects that are starting out $1 or $2 million, but then in total they're going to be about $4 million or so from the last scheduled capital projects that I saw. So we had applied for low-cost funds from the revolving fund, and I did not get a full response on that. I don't know if the council received something and that I didn't.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If you may recall, and Mickey Joe, in case I missed something here, but we applied for the grant, the S2 grant. Part of that was going through the low-cost loan process as well. But you may recall that was part of the grant requirement, and the direction the city council was to utilize a portion of the cash reserve for the wastewater treatment plant, along with the grant dollars through the S2 grant program. So that's the direction we're going with the next phases. Certainly concur that we don't want to be irresponsible and spend down our cash reserve for replacement and rehabbing too low. So it's one. Let's see. You have to make construction costs approve council for 1.276, so 1,276,000. That was back in May as a cash project, not using state funds, except for the grant funds, which we give. We were awarded the S2 grant, $48,420 for the project plan. 90% of the estimated cost of the city was $5,380. And we also received $88,100 for engineering and design of the digester and rate study. 90% of the cost for the city is $9,790. So the first phase is being paid with mostly the cash, but some of the grant dollars for the S2. But this program also allows us for future phases to utilize those low interest dollars.
Okay, so we have about 1.9 million in the sewer reserves, right? 2.1 million, of which, without cost overruns, which can come up, how much is that planned to be drawn down? That's a safety reserve, and that's specified in our code. So how much are we drawing that down?
Approximately 756,000 would be 756,926 would be left.
Out of 2.1 million.
Correct.
And our target is 1.8, 1.9 million, our usual target.
Correct.
And it's in the budget to restart
Right.
replenishing it. That's in the current budget.
Yeah, it is in the budget, but if you'll notice in the audit report, the auditors showed that on the source, on the water side, there was quite a gain in cash. On the sewer side, there wasn't as much of a gain in cash. It was slim.
Right.
So I think it is not prudent for this council to avoid using the low-cost funds at this time and draw down from 2 million down to 700,000 without even having your cost overruns yet, or without having your emergencies come up. Who can predict here at this table what the emergencies will be? So that's just not prudent and not good care for the community. Since we have a target of about 1.9 million, we should be very cautious. Is it too late for us to use the funds for the first portion because we've officially refused to use them?
We've not officially refused to use the funds, but when we bid the project, we did not bid the project as a state-funded project. So therefore, the requirements aren't in the proposal that we've received and started the contract under.
Okay, so it's not possible.
But for the other phases, in the design and bid that went out, the engineering cost and the design plan for all the phases, we are eligible, according to my understanding from Tetra Tech, is that we are still eligible to receive that low grant money for the remaining phases.
If we choose to.
If we choose to do that.
Future phases.
Yes.
Correct.
After we're drawn down.
Right. And the other thing that Plant Moran pointed out today that I'd like to remind the council is that that last step increase for the rate structure was only sewer, so this year we'll also have a cash flow for the sewer in that regard also.
We'll have a bump up
Right.
to some amount.
Right.
But if we have emergencies, it's not good to empty your safety reserve from 1.9 million to 0.7 million. It's just not right. It's not prudent.
Mr. Burgoyne, we've had this discussion as a body in the past. In fact, I remember our philosophical disagreement made the Saline Post when this issue was last brought up. And I respect your opinion that you think it's very prudent to borrow at this time, considering how low interest rates are. I feel differently. We have a sizable cash or fund balance, and these fund balances exist to be utilized in this manner. They're not meant to grow in perpetuity. And if you weren't to use it for a project like this, my question would be, what would be appropriate then? So I understand that we have a philosophical disagreement. I respect yours. At this point, at least for the first phase of this project, it's sort of water under the bridge, and this council can have a discussion and dialogue on how best to proceed with future projects. Okay. If there's nothing further, then we move on to public comments, the second public comment period, excuse me. Under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen may come forward at this time and make comment or question to City Council. This public comment period will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested but not required to state his or her name and address for the record.
Mary Hess. I was on council when we started TIFA, LIFA, and EDC. It was money that was captured, taxes that was captured from the general fund for the purpose of the industrial park and projects. The money was taken out of the general fund, and I agree with Mr. Burgoyne. The projects that are done in the TIFA district, such as our highways that are very important, second to the streetscape, should be taken out of the TIFA funds. I don't believe, and it is wrong, and it is against the concept of the EDC and the TIFA to take more money out of the general fund. That was not the purpose or the intent, to hit the taxpayers again. The other concept, a comment I wanted to make was that in the FYI it says Saline launches See, Click It, Fix. And apparently I don't have a smartphone, but I have many, many times brought pictures, concerns, ordinances, and made my 3-minute comment. And it appears that the non-responsive verbal was, other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how did you like the play? I think that if we are going to address the public on C-Click Fix, and we ask people to please come up and tell us your concerns, at what point do you address the concerns of those that come up and sit and use their 3 minutes to state their concern? I can understand it not being handled that night. I can understand it not being held for a couple weeks. But in a month, I would think it's reasonable to come back and address the concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hess. Are there additional public comments? No? Well, let me just make one statement. The C-Click Fix program is not meant to replace any other media by which citizens contact us, or to replace a public comment period where any citizen can make a comment or question either related to agenda item or not. And I would further state that every complaint, every inquiry that's received by a member of council or by city staff is looked at, and the petitioner is responded and communicated to. That doesn't always mean that the issue is rectified to the petitioner's desire, but we do, I can almost guarantee that this staff and this council puts a good faith effort into looking at it and attempting as much as humanly possible to rectify and deal with people's concerns. Is there any other business to be brought before Saline City Council this evening? Mr. Roth.
I'd be remiss not to thank our city treasurer, Mickey Jo Bennett, for her memo regarding the Saline Celtic Festival accounting recommendation and going through it and getting some of the numbers I requested. So I want to thank you very much for the time you put into, and I think it shows a better picture of what the festival really costs the city. And I appreciate your recommendations, and I hope that we can act on them in the near future.
Thank you, Mr. Roth. Upcoming meetings, I would just remind my colleagues, we do have a work meeting on October 21st at 6:30 to discuss property maintenance, and then a regular meeting at 7:30. Excuse me, I would also be remiss if I didn't add, I have been working with some of our local veterans and our American Legion post to possibly do a little veterans reception with very light refreshments on November 4th, beginning at 6:30 p.m., in which we invite all Saline area veterans to come for some punch and cookies and cake and coffee, and then honor them for their sacrifices and their contributions at the beginning of our council meeting. So I believe that will take place at 6:30 here in council chambers on November 4th to coincide with Veterans Day. Once that's confirmed, I will send out an electronic communique confirming that with you all. Okay. There are no absences this evening, so we'll dispense with that. So at this time, I would seek a motion to adjourn this city council meeting at 9:54 p.m.
Motion. Second.
Moved by Ms. Tahar, excuse me, and seconded by Councilmember Burgoyne. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. Ayes have it. This meeting's adjourned.